straight to talking cyber, we look at some startling new information from Google's Project Zero team. We look at why Apple's much lauded privacy features may not always be as good as they seem. And we'll explain the best way to cheat at Wordle and why that has some stark implications for the browser you're using on your phone.
So where shall we start? We start with Google. Why not? Google Project Zero. Now, probably worth explaining that these are, I hate to use the term elite, but they really are an elite group of security researchers whose job, if you like, is to reveal 0 days, not just in Google products like Chrome, but across the board. They say that they want to make it more costly, more resource intensive, and overall more difficult for attackers to use 0-day capabilities. So it's a worthy thing. And they just released their third annual report on the 0 days that they found last year.
Wow, so what have they found, Davey? Which products are affecting?
This is the thing. Let's be clear, Project Zero isn't just eating its own cat food here. They found 58 0 days overall last year. And they impact well beyond Google Chrome or Chromium-based browsers. The 0 days disclosed impacted Apple, so that's Safari, WebKit, iOS and macOS, Microsoft, both Windows and Exchange Server, and Android, as well, obviously, as Google Chrome, like for them and Brave.
And this is the thing, isn't it, with Project Zero? It has taken flack in the past for throwing stones. So when you step back and look at what they're reporting on some of these stats, do you think they're doing a fair job of, physician first heal thyself and all that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, originally there was all this fuss about Google Project Zero targeting their competitors, if you like, Google's competitors, and giving them this arbitrary 90 days to correct a 0 day to correct that vulnerability, to issue a patch. And if they didn't correct it in that time, then they went public and disclosed the vulnerability and the exploits that could be used. But now I think it's sort of settled down and it's balanced out a bit. So we had 58 0 days that Project Zero found last year and disclosed. The vast majority of those, 39 of them, were memory corruption related ones, which isn't surprising as threat actors have had such a huge success using the memory corruption stuff in their attacks for many years. But what is surprising, I think, to many people is that these 0 days took developers an average of 52 days to come up with a fix. And that might sound a long time, and it is when we're talking about a 0 day vulnerability, which means that attackers already have this and they're exploiting it in the wild. But it's better than 2 years ago. In 2019, it was 80 days was the average time to fix. I mean, 52 days, let's be clear. If an attacker already has an exploit for a vulnerability, that's a huge window for them to be able to clamber through unhindered. But for its part, Project Zero hopes that in 2022, we'll see more transparency from all vendors. So that's Microsoft, Apple, Google itself, although Google's been doing quite well with the transparency thing, in disclosing when a vulnerability that they are patching is actually being exploited. Because a lot of the time at the minute, vendors will issue a patch and say, we're doing this for these vulnerabilities, but they don't say that vulnerability X is actually a 0 day that's being exploited. And that's quite important, because if you know it's a 0 day, then it takes on a bigger import, especially if we're looking in terms of sharing exploit samples between researchers and technical descriptions for that matter. So that will help. Project Zero are also saying that they want a better effort across the board from all vendors when it comes to preventing these memory corruption vulnerabilities in code.
Yeah, I mean, it looks good for Project Zero, doesn't it? Let's be honest, because obviously they're reporting these vulnerabilities, they're pushing for kind of this best practice in the industry. I must say, with Apple over the last year, we have seen them being quite transparent when there is a 0 day that's being exploited and there's a fix for it. Obviously, there's a balance here, isn't there? Because you can't say what that vulnerability is at the time of fix, because obviously it gives attackers the opportunity to, or more attackers, the opportunity to pick it up and use it to attack people. So I guess it's important also to say that these vulnerabilities that are being talked about, or exploits, have actually been fixed, haven't they? That's why we've got the detail now, a year later.
Yeah, indeed. And on your point about giving out too many details, this is true, but Google actually handle this quite well with their Google Chrome updates, for example. If there's what we like to call an emergency update, where they just do an out-of-band update for Chrome, which just deals with one single vulnerability, which is always going to be a 0 day vulnerability, they make it plain that this vulnerability is a 0 day, that they're aware that there are exploits in the wild, but they withhold the technical detail. They'll tell you that it might be within the JavaScript engine, V8 engine of Chromium, but that's as far as they'll go. And that way they can actually emphasize the importance of updating your browser, which should be done automatically. And we cover that quite a lot here, but you do need to do it yourself and check and kickstart the process just to be sure. But they don't actually disclose all the technical information which would help other attackers to attack that threat.
Yeah, the only thing that they don't do that perhaps they could do is to say who's being targeted. If it's a really small group of people that are being targeted, maybe people don't need to worry as much. Obviously, it's good to keep up with your updates. But some of these, like Pegasus, I mean, it's such a small, succinct group that's being targeted, even if they have already been exploited. I don't know if there might be a way that the vendors can be doing this next year.
I think Project Zero actually cover this in their report, and they agree that a lot of these 0 days are quite specific targets, targeting politicians, press, media. There's often a geopolitical motive. But they also say that the bigger picture is something we should be looking at, which is that whilst these specific exploits are attacking a small, specific group of people, of victims, the actual underlying vulnerabilities, so the memory corruption processes, for example, are there and can be used for a much broader, a much wider attack base. So getting to the root of the problem is the important thing. And these 0 days help us to focus a little bit on how important it is to get to the root of the problem.
We've seen clearly Apple, as Kate said, hit with a surprising number of vulnerabilities / exploits, some exploited, some not, over the last year. And we've seen Apple taking flack for the first time as well, really, in terms of some of its, privacy compromises. So I know it's news again at the moment that they're screening for, explicit imagery on phones. It's hit the UK, so that's brought back the spectre of the on-device screening thing again, which clearly was a big hit for them prior to the launch of the current iPhone. And the last thing they want is that to repeat itself before the launch of this iPhone. I know, Kate, you've also been looking at on the positive side with Apple and privacy and what they're doing and impact on Facebook, which just keeps getting worse, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. A new report has come out saying that the losses to Facebook are going to total 12 billion. So it's slightly higher than people have been saying before as a result of the app tracking transparency features that Apple brought out in iOS 14.5 last year. I think it was last year. Feels like a long time. These are affecting advertisers a lot. But there's also been another report that has said that app tracking transparency can be used for things like fingerprinting, which we've seen a report on before. So Apple's features, in one way, they are affecting people who are tracking across other apps and services, but it is encouraging practices such as fingerprinting because people are able to circumvent them. Maybe it needs better policing. And I guess the other problem really is first-party tracking, which is happening a lot, especially with Facebook, because they've got so much data, haven't they? And I guess the answer is these reports are coming out criticising app tracking transparency. The other one was by Lockdown, which is an app that does tracking itself, which is a very good app, by the way, but they have their own purpose to say there are faults with it. It is a good app, and it is an application that is stopping tracking. It's just not 100%, and people need to be aware of that when they're using it.
And I think it's all about choice, isn't it? I think, we've talked a lot on SDC about, users can pick and choose the apps, the platforms there. You've seen a lot of stuff from DuckDuckGo in the last week in terms of trying to crack down on tracking as well, and pushing stuff out for the Mac. We've seen stuff from Brave and DuckDuckGo around cracking down on the way Google displays news. So Google tries to keep you within its little walled garden, and they're kind of bypassing that, which again is all part of the compromising or attacking Google's own tracking ecosystem. So I don't think anyone saying what Apple's doing is bad. It's just clearly, as these things happen, we find the holes in them, and then they need to do better, right?
Yeah, they do need to enforce app tracking transparency on developers a bit more strictly. It doesn't seem to be that well policed, to be quite frank. And we said that at the very beginning. It has improved, but it's not 100%. At the same time, it's affecting people's revenues, so you can't say it's completely ineffective. It's kind of getting that balance, isn't it? And at the end of the day, all the tech companies are in competition with each other. They all have advertising within their business, Apple much less so, but Facebook and Google are going to be trying to kind of grab all the advertisers into their own space, aren't they? So there's commercial reasons for this, as well as, reasons to kind of stop this as an industry, tracking people and making them aware of it too.
And I guess it's interesting when you look at Google, Apple, and Facebook. I guess the big difference is Apple and Google own an ecosystem. Facebook sits on other people's ecosystems, and that is a difference. So Facebook has been hugely vulnerable to the crackdown by Apple. Clearly, it's very beholden to Google not doing the same. And we've seen, clearly the metaverse trying to control the platform, both hardware and software, is a way to have a bit more influence over their own destiny. But I think that has thrown up questions around some of Facebook's platforms, particularly WhatsApp. I think we saw their rollout of communities in the last couple of weeks, which is kind of an incursion into social media for the first time on WhatsApp. WhatsApp were at pains in their own FAQ to say, hey, this isn't social media, you can't search, there's lots of privacy protections. But that kind of runs counter to Facebook's kind of normal kind of modus operandi. We've also seen some news, gossip, rumor, speculation that WhatsApp is going to start to charge a subscription for things like additional, multi-device access and all the rest of it. So clearly they're trying to find a way to monetize WhatsApp without compromising it. But I do think, and I've said and will continue to say, I think the time has come for people to look hard at whether WhatsApp belongs within the Facebook infrastructure ecosystem, because WhatsApp is a platform. It's a critical network used, particularly in the developing world, as a phone network. And I think everything that you're talking about on the privacy side with Facebook raises big questions about whether an unregulated global phone network, which is in essence what WhatsApp is, should be owned by the world's biggest data harvester and aggregator. I think this question, particularly as the metaverse kicks in with all of the security and privacy holes that's going to bring, particularly to young people, I think that's going to be a debate that's really going to catch fire in the next year or so.
What do you think about monetizing WhatsApp? Because obviously if it's separated from Facebook, there would be a completely different business model behind it. And that indicates to me the same thing that kind of Signal's talked about, which is paying for it. At the end of the day, you can have charitable donations, which have a limit, or people can pay for a subscription. So what do you think?
I've always advocated, I think we should pay for the services we use, or be prepared to have our data harvested and be advertised to. I think WhatsApp is sitting as a weird odd one out right now, because they're trying to find ways to monetize for the business community, for business users, but we're all about the privacy and security. You could go the Signal route. It's a charitable foundation, but I'm a huge fan of Signal, but you want to walk through central London and try and make a phone call on Signal, best of luck, it won't work, right? WhatsApp is incredibly reliable as a phone network compared to any of these other over the tops. So if you were charged £1 a month, £1 a year, £2 a year, whatever the dollars a year, whatever the numbers would be, but you got that level of service in return. I don't think that's a heavy price to pay, considering how much the functionality of a phone network, we clearly play our cell phone providers, you get with WhatsApp for video calls, voice messaging, sending rich data. So I think we as users need to either say, look, we're happy with our privacy to be compromised, or we're willing to pay a little bit to make use of the services that we need.
I'd happily pay a little bit for WhatsApp from the phone call point of view. If it allowed my mother-in-law, very elderly mother-in-law in West Yorkshire, to be able to use a WhatsApp phone call without it breaking up and disappearing within about 20 seconds. She calls my partner every day, and she always calls on WhatsApp for some reason, and the line always drops within 20 seconds.
Really?
And we have to phone her back. So yeah, they might be doing well in larger areas, more populated areas, but certainly more rural areas, I'm not so sure.
Can she get phone network there then? She can't voice calls at all, just Wi-Fi?
Purely WhatsApp that she has a problem with.
Wow. And is it...
Well, that's killed my story then.
Yeah, would 5G not help her?
No, you can't get 5G.
Potentially when it comes in, if it's the
part of West Yorkshire we're in was sort of border Halifax on one side and Bradford on the other, both of which have very good, reliable 5G signals. But we're a bit more rural, and because of that, it doesn't stretch as far as us at the minute. So
there's a real misunderstanding in terms of how 5G networking works. So for example, if you're making a WhatsApp call, a lot of 5G networks, it's 4G or worse up and 5G down. 5G is quick burst data, short range. It isn't really designed for broadband VoIP calls. It's not how the technology works. So
I thought further down the line, when standalone 5G comes out, that it was going to be used as the kind of last hop to the home.
But we are some way from, particularly outside of urban areas, some way for having uplink downlink 5G networks. It's I think there's a lot of work to be done.
And talking about the way things work, I understand that you've been looking at Wordle, the way Wordle works, or more to the point, how you can make Wordle work in a way that's different to how it was intended.
Yeah, I know there's been lots of sage advice out there in terms of how to cheat, the best way to cheat at Wordle. And, I don't think we're betraying anything that you can work out for yourselves by saying you can use private browsing. It gives you unlimited goes. So whether you actually want to start that way, or you don't want to run out your 6 guesses, and you've got one of those irritating ones where you're running through all of the 5-letter combinations and you've just got that one missing letter, and it could be 10 or 11 different options. So you can use private browsing, that will in essence not have the cookie stored, so you can start afresh. You can also exit the screen very quickly in case your partner is looking at you over her or his cornflakes. But I think what I'm looking at is some lessons or exposure, if you like, of how private browsing actually works, which was even a surprise to some of us on this call, right?
It was a surprise to me. I had no idea. In fact, as you know, I queried you when you first mentioned this.
Exactly.
Said, really?
But you didn't kill that story. But yeah, absolutely right. So if you look at Safari, so let's take Safari. Safari has exceptionally good private browsing. So if I open up a private window in my browser, my phone, my iPad, or whatever else, then in essence, it's a completely sandboxed, walled garden. Nothing first party or third party can track in or out of that particular window. So if I could, for example, run 3 or 4 different Wordle screens within that Safari session, and I could actually have unlimited guesses. And every time I close one, all of the history of that just gets deleted. Safari is pretty unique amongst the mainstream browsers for that. If I use Firefox or Chrome or Edge, and if I put those into incognito or private browsing mode, they run a session across all of the open windows. So when I open a new window in Chrome or in Edge, in essence, it carries all of the same cookies and everything from what I've got open already. In order to kill all the data and all the cookies, I have to close all of those windows. I have to exit the entire private browsing session. Now, this is a surprise because it means that even though I may have closed a particular window, I've still got that same level of potential tracking sitting behind that. So Wordle quite apart, and it might be irritating that you can't completely refresh your Wordle screen within, say, within Chrome or Edge. But more worryingly, if you're actually using private browsing as your default, which many people do now, and you're opening up lots of windows, the first-party tracking and potentially third-party tracking that exists within that, yeah, you can play games and stuff. So it, in essence, can track you from one window to another within that session. And that isn't how private browsing should work. Private browsing should be sandboxed window by window. It should be done exactly the way Apple does it. And I think, as I say, it's a surprise to many of us who now rely on it because we don't want to be tracked, that actually there is that level of tracking taking place behind the scenes. Worth adding, the browsers are open about this. If you go and look, say, look at Chrome will talk about the fact you have to close all of your windows in order to end that. But we now live in a world, particularly where we've got browsers open on our desktops, on our phones. You could have dozens of windows open at the same time. Who closes them, right? Well, you would never think to clear out the entire session, but you need to maintain the integrity of that private browsing experience. Yeah,
so I guess the lesson from this is use Safari. If you use Apple, use Safari. There is absolutely no reason not to, is there?
Yeah, particularly for an Apple user. The other lesson is if you want to catch a partner cheating at Wordle, if you go onto their private browsing and they've got any windows open and you open Wordle, you may find out that they've been there first.